Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone. You can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And over the last 8 years, after 4,000 radio interviews and going on the road and actually doing a lot of Facebook Live interviews in person with a lot of the cats, one of the revelations for me is that rhythm is love. Vibrations need to be raised in order for civilization to thrive. And I think what we're looking at now in society is a situation where we're on the precipice of possibly needing a complete dissolution of civilization in order for new musical vocabulary to be developed. My guest came about at a time when a musician, it's always been the racket, but a musician was deemed and seen as a profession. You could get ahead in life. You could raise a family and ultimately make a living doing it. And in some ways now we've moved into a situation where music is now a musician's gift to the world. You get about 10 minutes to make your name, and if you don't cut it in that time, you're done. There's no cultivation of talent. And ultimately, the reason my guest is so important is because he is one of the links in the chain, in the lineage of how real music is made on the bandstand and in the studio. He's out on the tip of Long Island in the luscious Suffolk County area. And what an honor. Corky Laing, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. The honor is mine. The honor is mine. It sounds like the intro was spot on.
Just riffing off the top.
Yeah, it's all right. It was very cool. It's funny. It reminded me when I went to my dad. I came from a big family, so the one you're going to have to choose one or the other. Cachis, you know what I mean? It's
Exactly.
kind of like it's fun, and that's what you keep in mind. The inventory's in the heart at this point. I like the way you describe the current situation in the music industry, in the music biz, because as we know, 50 years it's gone through quite a few changes.
Corky, I've interviewed, Gordon Lightfoot, David Clayton Thomas, and a bevy of other cats from the Toronto area. Yonge Street was this hotbed of cultivation of folk rock, you might say, but it was the Canadian version of folk rock, and it was it was communal, and a lot of individual. Neil Young came out of there, obviously, like cats like Richard Manuel and Rick Danko was a butcher. I mean, these guys were like street scholars, and I'm like thinking about Corky, and I know you came from Montreal, and I was just really hoping you could paint the picture for the audience about the communal hotbed of regional music that you were really a part of at that time when you were coming up.
Yeah, well, again, I was, before rock, there was pop music, and, the early 60s, late 50s, Fabian, and that's when the sound you heard when you put milk in Rice Krispies. It was pop. And then what happened is they discovered the electric bass, which allowed the drummer to start hitting hard, can drop the brushes, drop the bar mitzvah brushes and all the Sweet 16 play, and you're starting to hit hard. All of a sudden the Kinks came in, and they had a backbeat. And what you're saying is, in terms of the communal attitude, yeah, there was always an adverse situation between Montreal and Toronto, similar to Boston and New York, the sport team.
It was an adversarial.
Very, very, very competitive. An actual fact, Felix Pappalardi, who started the band with me with Mountain, played with Ian and Sylvia and Gordon Lightfoot.
Really?
He was the bass player.
Really?
And he played with them in Toronto. He came out of Toronto. He came out of the Greenwich Village, but he spent his 10,000 hours in Toronto, along with the band, who at the time were called the Crackers.
Absolutely.
And that was Ronnie Hawkins, the Crackers of the Hawks. So the Toronto had a much more intense substantial music loop. Montreal, they had the French Canadian thing, Charlebois, and they had a couple of other French bands, and so there was that. They divided the pop or the rock industry was divided in Montreal to French and English. Toronto was totally English, and you had the Mandel. There were some great musicians, Joni Mitchell came out of that, and Felix Pappalardi, coincidentally, the bass player and of course the founder of Mountain, came from there. Norman Smart, the drummer that played with Leslie at Woodstock, was the drummer for Ian and Sylvie. He was a country drummer.
Wow.
But that's why he didn't. Leslie and Felix said, "No way. We need to get, we need to get a drummer that understands the aggressive aspect of playing." And you don't tell Leslie West or Felix to turn down their Marshalls. You just don't do that and expect to hang in there. So he was dropped like a bad transmission in that band, thanks to my, And what happened is when they wanted to form a band, Felix and Leslie, with Steve Knight, they asked me to come in and be the original, act as the original drummer in Mountain, the band. Leslie at that point was doing his own thing. So what I'm getting at is going back to the Toronto thing. Yeah, there was a scene in Canada. You had the Guess Who at the time were being sued by the Who, because you didn't know who was the Who, and this was the early 60s.
Wow.
And the Guess Who had the big hit at that time. I forget exactly what it was. Shakin' All Over is one of those songs. And so they were in court, and it was kind of like the Who came to Toronto to find out what the Guess Who were going to do, and they were suing each other. It was quite a soap opera. And I must say that the Who ended up with the Who. Okay, so we know who is. The Guess Who, I think, turned into Bachman Turner Overdrive, and then so that was sort of the soap opera that happened in Toronto. And keep in mind, Jake, is that in Canada, you knew you had to cross 50s, excuse me, I wasn't a teenager. I was a teenager in the 60s, was to be everybody. If you were a teenager in the 50s, you were a nobody. So you had the transformation of not only trying to grow up in Canada musically, but there really wasn't any record companies that were doing anything. So if you're from Toronto or you're growing up, the band knew they had to cross the border. And when they did, of course, they had Albert Grossman there. And I'm rambling on, Jake, because I've had 14 coffees at this point.
Corky, listen, I want to tell you, listen, this is a stream of consciousness show, so you're on fire. The thing is, I understand. I mean, David Clayton Thomas was brutally abused by his father, beaten severely all the time, and then he was living in parking garages, and one day this is crazy, his dad said, "Go down to the basement, David." Amos Garrett told me this story, and he said, go down to the basement. You're going to get a whipping. And David had been taking some boxing lessons, and he wasted his dad and his dad called the cops on him. Okay, now here's the bottom line. David Clayton Thomas, speaking to your point, came to New York because of John Lee Hooker, because he knew that in order to get some momentum in the record industry or the biz, he had to come to the States. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about just your cultivation in Montreal. I mean, was there, when you say French, was there a definitive sound, because regionalism was everywhere when you were coming up. Was there a regional sound of Montreal?
I don't think so, Jake. I think most of the bands, and I'm sorry to say, were covering records. They were covering songs. They were covering.
I dig.
I dig. Yeah.
I dig.
You dig. So basically, like my dad said to me, because I love drumming and I love performing. I fell in love with the performance aspect. And, after seeing Keith Moon play, and I just looked at him, and, there's influence, cultivation, you're using that word. There's influence, and there's the other level to where not are you influenced, you want to be that person. You want to take over that vessel. And I remember here's the thing. In Montreal, all the English invasion bands came over in the mid '60s. They had to get their visas to go into their first tour in the States, so they came to Montreal waiting to get. They had to wait for the visa. And normally they played at the Forum, and I think they played Toronto Gardens too. But what I'm getting at is they had to had to come to Canada to get to their first tour. So here were the Who. Nobody understood that band. They were crashing the stage. It was total chaos, and the Canadians had no idea. Forget about the Montreal, audiences.
Right.
And I remember our band, because they had to hire a Canadian band for an international show. They hired my band. And I opened for the Who, and I opened for James Brown. I opened for the Kinks, Hendrix. Our band was lucky enough. The manager ran that show, so we got all the Invasion shows, which was amazing. So I saw Keith Moon play, and I said, "Boy, I want to be that guy." But this was before they were heroes. They were promoting the UK. Remember the Who? They dressed up with the flag on. They had, it was a whole different vibe. Eric Clapton, Cream came through, but they were nobodies when they came through. At the first, barely heard of them. But, Hendrix came through. He drew maybe 100, 200 people at Maurice Richard Arena before Foxy Lady was released.
Wow.
But our band, Bartholomew Plus 3, was opening all these shows over a period of 2 years. It was amazing, and I don't know why I'm telling you about this, except to know that the Canadian bands knew they had to cross the border also. It wasn't just the UK, the British invasion. America was where it was happening. My dad said to me, Laurie, if you want to find out how good you are, you go to where people know what a great drummer is. And the first place I went to was New York with a couple of friends that I had. And boy, New York in the mid-'60s was a tough little town. But at the time, I got to tell you, our band was booked at the Peppermint Lounge. All right, this is the mid-'60s. This is after the Beatles have been through there. Here's the deal. We had all the bands in those days were dressed. They had to have uniform dresses. In this case, the band was called Bartholomew Plus 3, trying to give it an tight beige pants and dingo boots. We were pretty little boys. So we're going to the Peppermint Lounge, Jake, and we didn't know at the time. I'm thinking the Peppermint Twist, Joey D and the Starlight. I'm thinking it's going to be cool. It turned into a gay club, Jake. Here we were like 15-year-old pretty boys coming in, and they loved us. Johnny Maestro and the Crest were the headliner at the Peppermint Lounge when we played there. Doing the 6 40-minute sets, getting 10-minute. Oh,
Absolutely, yeah.
It was tough. You remember those days. Anyways, what I'm getting at, but you had to get into the States. The Doors were trying to play New York. It was a wonderful time. Everybody was hustling, trying to play this. There was a place called Authors, which Elizabeth Taylor and all these. It was all a mixture of in New York of the Village, and you had the actors, and it was wild. And here we were, this Canadian band, these pretty boys from Canada who just finished playing bar mitzvahs and sweet 16s and Italian weddings in Montreal. There we were. We got our papers, and we came down there. And you know what? We made it work. We made it work. Somehow we went from the Peppermint Lounge, we got our papers for, I think, a month, and then we had a couple of weeks, and then we went out to West Hampton Beach. And West Hampton, guess who's playing there? And the venue, they were firing this band called The Vagrants. And Leslie West was the lead guitar player in The Vagrants. But The Vagrants were trying to get out of the draft, Jake. That was the Vietnam era. So Leslie was dressed up in drag. He wore lipstick. He had earrings. He had to go to the draft board, I think, that day. So when I met Leslie West, he was a total transgender. I was freaking out. I went, "What is this?" They said, "It's the draft."
Right.
The only thing the Canadians know about the draft was when you win, you leave a window open. There's a draft, But we didn't know anything about this war. It was quite wild. And who's playing down the street were the Rascals at the Barge. They had a club there, and that's where Sid Bernstein, who had put on the Beatles show, came in and managed the Young Rascals. And that's another story. A year later, boom. They're in the studio cutting grooving. Which, by the way, Jake, is a piece of trivia. I'm digressing here.
Hey,
Do
keep
you know
going. You're
that
doing great, man.
the only number one record, Jake, that did not have a trap drum set was Groovin'. In other words, you listen to bongos. There's no trap set. And I remember because I played with Felix Cavalieri a few times, and I love that song. And Felix is amazing. But he told me that Ahmet Erdogan and all the people at the right, you got to put a drum set on there. And Felix defended. He said, no, the bongos are a groove. You know, the song's called Groovin'. Anyways, I have no idea where I'm going right now, Jake, but it has
Corky,
to
I
do
mean,
with the
listen,
era.
listen. I want to be very clear about something. You're just getting hip to my show, but you're channeling the Jake Feinberg show. It's a stream of consciousness show, and I mean, I was born in 1978. So I mean,
Right.
this is very important for my daughters and future generations to know how real music is made, and so my I guess my question really goes back to this idea of you talked before very eloquently about this pop, what was considered pop music at a time, and and then the Rice Krispie analogy and the milk hitting the Krispies and the snap crackle and pop. But I mean, did you, even though you wound up in Mountain, which was very power heavy music, rock, very saturated heavy music, did you learn early on with the Bartholomew Band?
Messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you learn to play? Did you learn to keep time on the top of the kit? Because so many of the cats that I love, Papa Joe Jones, or so many of the great drummers of the time, jazz drummers specifically, they were using the bass drum for rebound and accent, and it was not just
Right.
it was not just like today you go in, you listen to electronic music. I mean, the rhythm today, for the most part, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but it's become very quantized. And when you were coming up, it was like this big round basketball. It was very round. It didn't matter if it was rock music.
Right.
And I wanted you to talk about your evolution as it related to using the top of the kit to keep time. And if so, when did you do it?
That's really a great point of conversation, Jake, because one of the lucky and we never used a click track. The idea of a click track is it holds you down, it tethers you to something that you don't understand in most cases. The era of John Bonham, Keith Moon, Ginger Baker, forget about a click track. I was in the same lucky place. I never had to use a click track. I was never tethered. So whatever feeling I had, I was emulating through what I was playing, whether it was the bass drum, and a lot of the English artists and drummers especially use top end because there's a whole electronic power thing over in England when they plug in. If you listen to UK records from Olympic Studios, the power, there was a fidelity there that the drummer could take advantage of on the high end with the cymbals and the snare. A lot of Al Jackson, a lot of American funk bands use the bass drum and the backbeat on the snare. And as Greg Allman told me, he says, Cork, if you want to play Southern, you got to play a pubic hair behind the beat on the snare. And that's what I said, okay, Greg, you got it. Because I've always respected the Southern vibe and the Southern feel. You're asking about the high end on the cymbals. I agree 100%. The English drummers, whether it was Ginger or B.J. Wilson or, I can't think, quite a few of them, but the idea of not being tethered, you were able to express your freedom as a drummer in a band with other guys who respected you, hopefully, and that would drive the audience. The audience at this point were freedom lovers, the flower people. You're talking about people that were reaching out into the ozone to feel freedom. And the freedom of playing drums is one of the most wonderful places to be. It's a freedom that only people that dance, only people that take their ears and takes over their body. I'm telling you, I was very lucky to play in an era where the drummer was the leader in the band, even though his name was not up front. He was sort of like the left tackle on a Super Bowl team. He never got really known. But the point is, the team was great. If it was a great band, it had a great drummer in most cases. You talk about Levon Helm. He wasn't a power drummer, but his vibe was powerful. You know what I mean? His essence, his posture. To me, he's one of the most powerful men in the world. I'm
Absolutely.
going to miss him. But these are people, and you're going back to the Canadian thing. The good thing about playing all the 6,000 hours was because you had the freedom. I feel bad for a lot of drummers now because they are the radio, excuse whether it's radio, TV, movies. Everybody's used. Everybody gets used to the sound of the backbeat, which is basically programmed in most cases. All I can say is if you listen to the drumming on that movie that King starred in called Birdman, you remember Birdman, that movie where the director never did an edit. It was the camera followed. I can't think of the guy's first name. Keaton. What's his name? The actor. Keaton. Anyways, the
James
point
Keaton? James
is,
Keaton?
eh, yeah,
Yeah.
Keaton. He was. It was a movie called Birdman. It came out about 4 or 5. But the drummer, the track, the movie track was this jazz drummer just playing spontaneous, playing off the top, and it just went along with the movie as the movie moved along. And the reason I bring that up is because that's the quintessential uh, freedom of a drummer to actually be a whole soundtrack for a movie. There's tempos, there's dynamics, there's all these accents that you use when you play drums, but that movie was an amazing example of a drummer doing the whole soundtrack. And I don't know if anybody in your audience knows it. They got to know about it. It's. Let's put it this way. In short, I'm a lucky booger because I got a chance to play with some great players who never told me what to play. And I'm not boasting because I asked them. I said, Jack, what do you want? He says, I want what you want. And what you want is just to cook. And I did the best I can. And I'm saying you got to be really lucky to play with musicians that trust you. You know, they actually give you the trust and respect. And I don't know if I deserve it or I don't, but that's not the point. I had to come up with shit. And I just went crazy. I just started slapping that snare around as much as I could. And at the end, I said, Felix, you may want to just edit all that. And Felix said, no, man, that's real. Because Felix knew I was very frustrated. What do you do? I don't know. We'll do something. Okay. And you panic. That panic is part of playing. Anyways, I'm sorry to go on and on, but I
Corky, no,
must say
this is
that,
really important. I mean, I mean, when don't you feel that? I mean, setting all the, sort of colloquial things like the flower power, that generation of the '60s. I mean,
yeah,
the ability for the band, and you can talk about Mountain or any of the collaborations you were in. I mean, the ability of being able to use the top of the kit enhance the collective consciousness of the entire community, meaning the band would get to a certain place consciously and their consciousness would be raised, and that would go out to the audience and then come back to the band. I mean, part of it was about letting the part of it was letting the body dance. Corky Laing wants to let the body dance, and today it's just this restricted, almost no space. And that was my question: is with you guys also, because I mean, I've interviewed all the heavy jazz drummers, guys like Lewis Hayes and people like that, and he said the same thing. Nobody ever told him what to play, and the thing is that, did you guys get? Were you guys really that concerned or uptight about tempo shifting if things sped up or slowed down? I get the feeling you didn't really care about that either.
You try to keep it in a groove, part of the groove thing. But what you brought up is again a pretty good point. Leslie West, Felix Pappalardi, Jack Bruce, Noel Redding, these guys, they were drummers. They had more time in their left finger or whatever than most drummers. I didn't have to play drums. You're right, I played the top end. I added percussion. They didn't need a drummer. They had more time than anybody, these guys. I just happened to be lucky. And there are a lot of great players out there today and tomorrow and yesterday who do have a pulse. They have a pulse within them. They don't need a drummer. You don't need it, but you get in there, you add the top end. You're right. I call it percussive. You're calling it high end. It's the same thing. I was able to have the freedom to add to the feel, because these guys had feel. I'm going to say it over and over again. I was really lucky because you're really as good as the people you play with, and you just try to play with the best. And if you do get beside those guys, like I did, God bless it. I will never forget it.
Where do you feel like your ears grew the most? I remember on the bandstand. I remember talking to Steve Cropper, and for a long time, those guys would be playing dance halls or places like that, and the PA systems were woefully inadequate, and you could barely hear yourself on stage. But what was happening was that the musicians themselves, their ears were getting huge, and I'm wondering about where your ears grew the most on the bandstand, especially when in those days when you went to New York. When, let's be honest, I mean, I can't speak, in the jazz setting at least, a lot of times not everything was mic'd. The bass wasn't necessarily mic'd, so you had to.
That's funny. I got to tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jake, for some reason, heavy metal is happening big time for the last few years, and for some reason I've been associated with that. And I tell you why. Is because when I came down from Montreal and I walked into the studio, and you have Leslie West with 4 huge cabinets of Marshalls, and then Felix comes in with Jimi Hendrix's X amps, 6, huge amps. They didn't have any elaborate miking, especially live. So I had to bust my ass just to be heard. Hence, instead of counting, they wouldn't hear 1, 2, 3. I had to do the cowbell and smack it as hard as I could. Teeth, 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 teeth. That's how they knew the intro.
Right.
And I'm saying I got known as a heavy metal drummer because instead of tom-toms, I had timbales, which were like neutron bombs if you hit them right. You know what I mean? So I didn't have the delicate triggers of these mics back in the late 60s, early 70s. And there I am coming from a basically local band into this fucking humongous, over-the-top, loud, band. But it wasn't just loud. I'm proud to say we had some great melodies. But Leslie was a lickmeister. He would fucking rip out those licks, and Felix would have that beat. We called it hit a note that lasted 14 minutes at a time. So the idea of playing that kind of music, I had to hit really, really hard. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how to take it, but in Germany, they wanted to give me an award for the most powerful drummer. And I'm thinking, is that a compliment? I like to get a jazz name.
I mean, that was my goal on this interview, is to say, there's more to Corky Laing than power drumming. This is not. There's dynamics too. I mean, there's heavy dynamics in your playing, and that is also something that you go in today to see shows, and a lot of times the band will crank it up to 10, and it will just stay at 10. It will never change. Dynamic.
That's right.
There's no dynamics, and so the dynamics came from the lack of sophisticated miking techniques. I guess maybe I'd like you to talk a little bit to younger cats about your own point of view about creating space in the music as a drummer, especially in the context where it's, I recognize that not everybody feels comfortable playing, there's the old saying, you never play the same song the same way once. That's really I love that kind of music. I love people that will take folk tunes, leave the head of the tune, and go out and play improvisationally. That's a form of jazz, in my opinion. But a lot of
Mountain was very much. Mountain Felix insisted that every song had an improv section that we would do, and all Felix would say is, "Go where you want to go. Just make sure we all know where that one comes in when we come to one. Just make sure everybody on the stage knows where that one is." And I did this show called The Best Seat in the House, where I talked about, as a trio, usually the drummer's in the back, usually on a riser. The drummer sees the guitar player on the left, the bass player on the right, and look straight down. And like Keith Moon says, if you look close enough, you get all the cleavage in the front row. And what you try to do as a drummer is you want to lead. You want to lead those guys to perform. So that crowd, like you said before, very prolific, by the way, you said the crowd responds. And if I may say so, it could be corny, but that's the circle of life. You play, you give them your heart, along with the bass player and the guitar. You give it to them, and the crowd soaks it in, and they give it right back to, if you're on the money, and they give it back to me. And then I go back and I give them more, and I leave more space, and then they fall in. And that's where the space is. You've got to let the audience fall into the music. It's really important. You can't keep pushing with volume. You can't. It doesn't work. You do it a little bit, then you leave room, and the audience goes, whoa. It's a gravitational pull, and it's very cool. It's like breathing for an hour with like 1,500, 6,000 people, because you can do that. You can do that with music. You can do it with jazz. You can do it with anything as long as it flows properly. And yes, you got to give it space. And a lot of times I just stop playing. And the band will keep, but the band is cooking. You don't need that, but I'll be able to punch in.
This is really amazing.
And just startle somebody.
Right,
you know?
right. I mean, I want you to just talk a little bit about the evolution of, or your concept of when Leslie would say, we got to know where the one is. How, for Corky Laing, like, I just want to get your concept of the idea that any note, the downbeat, any note can be the one. And how you guys ultimately found, I know that you must have fallen on your faces a few times before you really, where it became almost telepathic when you knew you could all hit on that one. Because there's nothing more cathartic.
Telepathic is exactly the word. You know, you play and you get used to the lick and you get used to how Leslie has the curve, because he plays a story. When he does leads, he plays the story. And then Felix comes under him, just giving him a pillow. Every now and then the pillow would fall out and Leslie would come down, and I need a few days on this interview to describe it.
No, this is just part one. This is just part one. I really love you to try to.
What everything is what you remember with, I don't know what it was called, the movie with Billy Crystal, where they went out to do a dude ranch. And the guy, you remember, and they wanted an answer from that actor.
Corky, just for the record, I just don't watch any TV. I only talk to cats. I don't watch any. So I can't help you with these.
How do you do life? And he put up his finger and he said, "You just know one." I thought, I don't know who he was referring to music,
yeah, right.
But I'm using that particular illustration for the one thing, because everything starts at one and everything ends at one, and it's kind of interesting. Once you know how to prepare the other musicians in terms of your fills, in terms of your dynamic, in terms of your, whether it's a backbeat, a front beat, the point is that you breathe together. It is telepathic, and there, of course, you can look at each other. I find that one thing I loved about Mountain is we all looked at each other all the time. It wasn't a matter of trying to be cool, turning your back to the audience or doing it like that. Felix would look at me, stare at me, and I loved it. It was like, it looked scary, and it was scary because when I started, man, I got to tell you, man, it was scary, but I just played the best I could. And I played with as much taste as I could. And there's not a lot of drummers that do play with taste, because they figure you're going to bang that drum, just bang it. And I fell in love with tom-toms because I had timbales. And I did, because my mother ordered all these records in Montreal from Cuba. She used to play a lot of Cuban music. And I got a cowbell and I got some percussive toys. They're great. And the point is, the one is where it's all at.
Were you going to see like Tito Puente and
yes.
Those, because those guys,
when they were in town, a lot of those guys never came to Canada. It was too cold.
No, but they were playing the Palladium though when you were down there.
Yeah, that's true. I was when I could, I did. with the weather report. What's his name? The percussionist. I can't think of his name now. But he lived with me.
Hold on.
He came up and
Dom Umramal?
could have been, because I got to think of it. You caught me on that one. What I'm getting at, anything you could take in, I would take.
Hold on, you were the
cat.
The cat from Weather Report, the percussionist was you guys were living together.
Yeah, well, he came to my house in Nantucket. He was playing with the keyboard player from Back to the Future. Not Back to the, Larry Coryell's band. I'm trying to think of the name. You got me on a few things, but these were the jazz guys, the fusion guys. Larry Carlton, Larry Young, the keyboard player.
Larry Young. When
Miles
did you?
Davis.
Hold on, I need you to tell me about Larry. When did you cross paths with Larry Young?
That's beautiful. Thank you.
These are the stories I need. This is why I do my show.
I can tell you. 1967, the Black Bottom, which was a jazz club in Montreal, and that's when Tony Williams came in, and Larry Young, and what's his name, Carlton, the guitar player.
No, McLaughlin, John McLaughlin.
McLaughlin, Larry McLaughlin. My fault. Okay, my bad. But they came. Our band Energy at the time opened up for them at the Black Bottom. We were three white guys playing this real black-oriented club. It was amazing, but I pushed very hard to play there. And I sat for 2 weeks watching Tony Williams play, and it was brilliant. I mean, that's the way you learn. You're on the road. You got to get out there. But I never thought of it as jazz or whatever. I just thought brilliant, just brilliant music, And at this point, I think I was 16, 17 years old. What a great time to just absorb it. I was a fucking sponge. That's what I did. I just took everything in. And I don't want to boast about doing jazz. I mean, to me, that's a specialty. I totally respect the proper jazz drummers, but I'll do everything I can to steal.
You came up at a time when that was you integrated that into your own truth, and that's the most important thing. I mean, Larry Young was kicking bass pedals. There was no bass player in that band, was there?
No, they weren't. Actually, you're right. There was no bass player. We had the keyboard player. Yeah, he had the pedals.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
No, it was great.
Corky, I mean, what is it about? I mean, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about music, how it's been a healing force in your life as well. I mean, I interview a lot of cats, and they're still playing. In some ways, they're playing better than they ever have, and they're 80 years old, 85. I mean, I just saw Roy McCurdy from Cannonball's band playing his ass off. He's 80 years old, and James Gadsden.
It's brilliant, isn't that brilliant?
Well, I'm just trying to, you know what it is? It's this is a total sacred journey. To the Jake Feinberg Show, and rhythm has propelled it, and going to see music now is a completely, divine thing. And I wanted you to talk about how music and rhythm has healed you in your life.
That's really that's the end game. Is that's the joy of playing. The more you play, the juice goes. The juice moves inside, and that juice, whether it be blood, whether it be talent, whether it be, you learn with your head, and then you play with your heart and the soul. And hey, if the pocketbook comes out with a couple of bucks, good. But basically, hey, I'm 72 years old. Jake, I never thought I'd make it to 50. You know what I mean? So here I got all this extra time.
I love it,
man.
It's
fucking wonderful. It's again, and I feel every day I wake up, whether it's here or whatever, I go to the drum set. The drum set is my life, and I don't go there because I'm boasting about I'm going to get better. I have to get better. Every time I sit on the kit, there's something I don't know that I'm going to learn that day. It could be a downbeat. It could be whatever, a cymbal crash. I love it because it's wide open. A lot of drummers get bored at a young age because they don't think it's anywhere to go. There's no notes per se. But I got to tell you, the drums are the most beautiful fucking instrument ever made. You know what I mean? I mean, it's one of the oldest, but I have to celebrate it every day. And as a result, I have to say I feel younger than ever. I'm always 19 years old. Jake, every day I wake up, I sit on that kit. It's the best seat in the house. You can't get any better. You're in charge. It's everything you want to do. And you know what? It's a chick magnet.
It certainly is. I mean, it's well. Yeah. I mean, when you're Did you like? I mean, I played drums with a couple of surrogate uncles here in Tucson. Not any gigs, but I mean, we jam every Monday, and I have to tell you, when I feel that four-way coordination, I can feel the magic of rhythm, and I just wonder, like, for you, uh, how how did you learn that four-way? How did you learn that discipline? I mean, there were no jazz schools. Music was
No,
essentially a
yeah.
street music, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, what, how did you develop your own? Here's the better question, because you're talking about being influenced by all these Afro-Cuban rhythms, albums that did not have traditional trap sets, which are oftentimes my favorite albums. Dizzy Gillespie used to do albums with just bongos and timbale and congas, and
Yep.
there was something about the descarga, that spiritual release. And I'm just wondering about, for you, how did you, and how would you talk to cats today because of the amount of technology that basically can cover up or paper over anybody's imperfection, which I think is perfection. But you have this sort of formula trip going on. You have this homogenization of sound going on, and nobody in Mountain, nobody in any of your bands would have ever tolerated that because they just wanted to burn. And so I wanted,
Yeah,
I
I'll
just
tell
want,
you what.
yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead,
well, I'll try to answer that. I don't mean to interrupt you.
go ahead.
Here's the thing: is that it's eye to hand coordination. Personally speaking, I never took a music lesson. I learned how to read a little bit, but I never boast about that. And I want to be very careful about the Cuban thing. I just listen. And if I can go see a band and watch the drummer, which I always do, it's eye to hand. I look and see whether it's Cozy Powell or any of those guys. Those guys were hitters.
Oh yeah,
And and let's put it this way, eye to hand. I'm able to do that, and I think I'm very fortunate. I'm able to look at something and imitate it right away, whether it's left, right, ambidextrously. I like to think of drums as being choreography on a seat. You know what I mean? If you watch some of the best drummers you ever see, it's a choreography with their hands and their feet, and it's eye to hand or eye to foot. And it's not easy. I'm not trying to make it easy, but that's the way I learned. I watched every drummer everywhere, anytime I could, and I was very lucky because when you play and you're in a band, you tend to play with other bands. There's festivals and all these, and I keep on using the four-letter word, and it doesn't start with F. It starts with L, and for me, it's simple. Jake, it's simple. I just love looking and playing and replicating whatever it takes. It's a move, tendonitis, and I don't have a lot of back problems and stuff, even though I've been sitting on the drum throne, for 50 odd years. I'm a lucky son of a bitch. What can I tell you? At the same time, I'm a hustler. Personally, I hustle. I came from a big family, and the book that I believe you were told about at some point, Letters to Sarah, describes me trying to be on the road or being on the road, trying to connect with my family. Because the book I wrote to my mother, letters, 300 letters over 40 years. Everywhere I played, I would go back to the hotel, and it's lonely, whether I'm playing Carnegie Hall or Radio City. That audience does not go back to the hotel room with you.
I know.
You're
Yeah,
alone.
it's a very good point.
And
No, I wanted you to talk.
yeah.
This is what I wanted
Go
you to
ahead.
get at, is that I've always been fascinated by this because you reach a level of stardom and, you have all this adulation and people are screaming your name. And whether you're on the tour or even, you go home and you're cleaning up dog shit in the backyard, or you're and you're back to just being who you think you are. And I wanted you to talk about how the road can eat you alive, and ultimately how you overcame it and are still here today to not only talk about it, but you're still loving getting on that trap set every day because
Yeah.
the
Well,
road.
yeah, you're right. It is scary sometimes. I equate it symbolically to a Nantucket sleigh ride, which was way back 150 years ago. there was an industry, the whaling industry in Nantucket. Now, I did live there for during the 70s and 80s in Nantucket, but I used to be enthralled with the stories of going out looking for the whale, the big one, right? They wanted to get the big whale. So if they spotted them, this crew would jump into the longboat, and they slowly row up to the whale, and they put their harpoon with a rope, and they throw the harpoon at the whale and hit the whale with, and they grab it. And the whale didn't do anything because it hardly felt. Then they hit another harpoon, and the harpoon is attached to the boat, the longboat. These boats are not very big. And they throw another So, but after 3 harpoons, the whale, the symbolic big one that all rock and roll musicians want, they want the big hit record. And they'll hold on. They'll travel around the world. They'll go to press here, and they'll play here. The longboat, the whalers, they hit the whale, and the whale would take them on a Nantucket sleigh ride, which like over waves and you know, splashing around out 40 miles at sea. And these guys are holding on to the rope, to the harpoon, and they're going, and they don't know if the whale's going to dive and take them under. They don't know. The whalers took a risk because they wanted the big one. Symbolically, that's what musicians during my time, and the time they get a record, it starts getting played, and the rock and roll machine just says, okay, boys, and you are going out there. You're going to go wherever and whatever you have to do, and you do. It's scary out there. You don't know what you're going to get into, drugs, women. You don't know if the plane's going to. You don't know. It's scary, but that's what the Nantucket sleigh ride is, and that's what this business became, because on the road you never knew if you were coming back. And there are a lot of brothers and sisters in the music business, in the music field. They don't come back. They never came back. So the tribute of Nantucket Sleigh Ride, the tribute of playing out there, is a tribute to the people that didn't come back, but they went for the big one, whether it was a big hit record or whether it was a whale. But that's, to me, symbolically what I'm doing now. I'm still on the ride, Jake. I'm enjoying it. It's tiresome. But that's what I do. You know, like I mentioned before, I think Dizzy Gillespie said, we don't get paid to play. We love to play. We get paid to travel. And that travel is the ride. That's the ride. And sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes it's a tragedy. And we know about both. And I'm sure you do too, because whether it's jazz, classical music, what you go for the ride.
Well,
you know,
and there's also, I mean, there's just also, I mean, it's such a that's one of the best things. I mean, you've been waxing poetic for an hour, but that was one of the best stories I've ever heard in my life. I mean, the Nantucket sleigh ride, because, I mean, there were so many geniuses who died broke. In music, or they were just beginning to take off, and the machine got their tentacles into them, and you know, for whatever reason they succumbed to it. But I mean, ultimately, how, like, when did you first get when did you finally? Was there early on in your career the first time when you went on that sleigh ride? And finally, after all the waves were crashing into you and you almost capsized, but the whale finally succumbed and you hit it big, what was that transition for you like personally?
Scary. It was scary because as a person, as a musician, it's inside. Your inventory is inside you. And when people start looking at you different, and it's not so much they want something, they imagine you're somebody else,
right? Because
you've had this success, which they don't understand. The audience does not understand success.
No.
And I'm sorry to say a lot of musicians who are successful don't understand it, but there's one thing that comes through. It's scary because it's not real. You know, it is how do you put it? It's a posture that's not. It's not real. People look at you different. People talk to you different. But I have to say, Jake, in all honesty, I never had that particular kind of celebrity. You know, and I'm glad. You know, I know a lot of guys whether you're talking to Mick Taylor or something, these guys are musicians. All of a sudden, they're in the fucking Stones, you know?
Right.
And he's going, whoa, what is this? What is this? I just want to play my guitar. And the trouble is, when you're touring, you don't get a chance to play guitar. You're on a fucking airplane. You know, you can't play guitar. You got to do something else, or else you're in a car. In other words, most of the time, you're traveling. So you don't get a chance to do what you love to do, which is play. And then you get to a venue, and you've got 20 minutes for a sound check. So, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like what we do, we don't get a chance to do when we want. And it's scary because you hold on to that. You know, there's a tendency that, you know, to be tended to, you know, to what you are. You want to attend to play. Yeah, drumsticks. I always have a sticks with me all the time. But I need my kit, you know, personally. And I don't want to get too philosophical about it. It comes off very corny.
No, because I mean, Joe Morello used to bring a practice pad with him everywhere. I mean, there's no harm in that either.
No, I do. We a lot of guys do. I remember what's the name of the Golden Earring? We were on tour with that drum. You remember they had some hot songs, really.
Golden Earring, yeah.
You remember Radar Love? I think it was, yeah. Anyways, the guy would bring the entire drum set into these dressing rooms, which were hockey dressing rooms. They're locker rooms. You want a migraine headache, you just walk into that room, and he would play like an hour. And we're, you know, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have. Yeah, my juice on my phone is going out. What I'm saying to you is, I couldn't believe it. But he didn't want a pad. Forget that. He had the entire with a double bass show. And, of course, he's driving everybody else nuts because, you know, you just want a little peace and quiet sometimes. But I just remember, and I said to him, really? Like, he's a German guy, sweet guy. I think German or anyways, Danish. But I said, you know, Henrik, really? You bring the whole fucking kit? Can you just... Oh, man, I bring it back to my hotel room. I said, give me a break, a hotel. I don't know what these guys do, but he loved it, you know. And I'll tell you what,
he's
he's
unbelievable.
a great drummer. That's all I know.
No, because we're gonna have to do part 2 very soon because this was you made a very prescient point. You said a lot of cats that are from your generation, especially that are, you know, they get older and they have tons of monetary success. They've made a lot of albums, but maybe the phone isn't ringing as much anymore, or basically they become bitter and resentful. And the long and the short of it is that what I've come to learn is that those musicians, their ego was fully invested in the music, and they didn't realize that they were merely a conduit for the music coming through them, and that they were only partially responsible for it. And I wanted you to talk about when you got the memo. You know, Corky Laing got the memo about being a conduit for the music and being able to get out of the way of your own ego.
Well, Jake, that's you're right. That's an answer that may take a couple of days. To straighten me out every time I thought I used to be somebody. You know, that's what it comes down to is the personality you're talking about. I don't quite get, and it's not that I'm humble or anything like that. It's just that I never got into that place where you're aloof or any way. I never sort of celebrated that. And when it comes to acknowledging anything, when I sit on the drums, every now and then I'll just play for a week, and then all of a sudden I'll go into the zone. I'll go into this zone to where I'm not playing. That's what you're talking about. I'm not doing anything. This zone is taking my body. Are you there?
No, I'm here. I'm taking it all. I'm taking it all in. Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
I'm just saying. There we go. I was in the zone. When you get into the zone, drumming wise, your hands and your feet just do it. You have nothing to do with it. Your hands and your feet just take off. It's an amazing feeling. It's very psychedelic, all I can tell you. And there's no drugs involved. There's no medication. It's just sometimes your body gets tuned, muscles, everything, to do something. And, boy, what a trip, because you fly. You fly.
And I think it happens when you're, and then that you couple that with the trust. When you trust people on the bandstand, that's when you can get into that zone. That's when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
and-
referring basically to a personal thing when you talk about the personal zone. But I got to tell you, Jake, with all honesty, I have no problem calling you back or continuing this, but I'm losing the juice on my phone.
No, so listen,
And
I'll call
sorry.
you. I'll call you later, and then we'll set up a time like this week to do part 2 or tomorrow or something. You know, we'll just keep cooking.
If you'd like to do that, it would be my pleasure. I see where you're going and what you're doing here, and it's brilliant.
Well,
It's brilliant. I love it.
It's Corky.
You know, it's not like what's your favorite color, you know?
Welcome to my world, man. I really it's great to connect with you, man. I'll send you some interviews you can listen to at your leisure too. You're gonna really. I've been honing this for 8 years, and there's nothing going on like it in the world. So I appreciate you going there with me.
Well, you sound like you know it, and I'll be more than privileged to join you again. Call me back, and we'll take it up again. And I'll juice up the phone. Your subject matter is spot on. So I'm there, boy.
All right, much love to you, man. Juice that phone up. I'll call you. I'll call you later.
Okay, that sounds fine. So ready to go.
Good enough,
Take care,
man.
buddy.
Good
God
to hear,
bless.
bud. Yep.
Bye now.
Bye. What a fascinating conversation with a guy who's been doing it forever, Corky Laing. And we'll have to do part 2 and probably more after that. We'll be back later tonight. Until then, this is the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk. Thank you.